What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Art of Show. We are hanging out with Luke Flowers today, and we're going to dive into what it's like to make a big transition in your creative career.
Welcome to the Art of Show, where we feature the people who are creating amazing stories for kids. Join us as we chat with children's book illustrators and authors, storyboardists, animators, and more. Now, their art might be for kids, but aren't we all just kids at heart? Here's your host, Brandon.
All right, guys, so we are hanging out with Luke Flowers, but before we get into the interview, a couple things for you guys. As always, if you like what is happening here on the Art of Show, we've got a lot of fun interviews coming later in March as well as in April. If you're listening to the podcast, head on over and subscribe, leave a comment, and leave a review on iTunes. That would be a huge help. Or if you're chilling on YouTube, just subscribe below. Hit a big thumbs up, and that would be a big help. So if you guys did not know, if you're listening to just the audio, I try to do actual video interviews with these folks. So if you want to see their faces and sometimes their artwork, if we're going around their studios, it's a ton of fun to check out. So if you head over to brandoncullum.com/YouTube, and you'll see it. But so this week we're talking with Luke Flowers. I saw Luke's work just kept popping up over and over and over again over on social media. And I felt like he was connecting to lots of children's book illustrators and authors that I've had on the podcast. And so stumbled onto his site. And if you have not seen his illustrations, they are pretty amazing. He has a pretty long career working with Student Life as their creative director up in Colorado. And then he talks about how he went out on his own and started his own creative agency, doing illustrations for a ton of different clients. But what we really get into is his kind of transition into the kidlit world. And his focus to that. And so there's these different times in his life where he makes this big transition, not a big transition, but makes transitions into things he's more and more passionate about. And I thought that was really interesting just to kind of see a fun conversation. It was a blast to talk to. So if you guys are looking for the show notes, if you guys head over to brandoncullum.com/20, this is episode 20, hard to believe. Check it out there. But without further ado, let's dive into our interview with Luke. Alrighty, guys. Well, welcome back to the Art of Show. We're hanging out with illustrator extraordinaire Luke Flowers today. Been in the industry for a while, doing some pretty amazing things. So, Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I need to apologize to you and anybody that's listening. I have a little bit of a cold, so if I sniffle during this, I'm so sorry. But so you are in Colorado, is that right?
Yep, Colorado Springs. So yeah, just about an hour outside Denver.
Gotcha. Are you originally from Colorado?
I actually grew up in Buena Vista, which is about 2 hours outside Denver, a little mountain town. But yeah, it was a great little town to grow up in.
That's cool. I might have been on your About page, or I might have been reading an interview, and it was saying that you felt like you wanted to be an illustrator since like second grade. Is that right? Like, has art always been a part of your story? Is that your family, or is your family artistic? Or
No, I don't really have any artists in my family, but they were definitely big supporters of it, which I think really helped. But yeah, I think ever since I was like second grade, I felt like it was one of those like clear sort of like, this is what I want to do for a living, you know. It came out of like just watching like Jim Henson, you know, and I felt like for me that it was like he did such a wide range of creativity that I felt like it wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm going to write children's books. I mean, that was definitely something I loved at the time. And, but just thinking like the world is open when it comes to creativity. So where that would go, I wasn't quite sure at that time. I definitely loved books, and a lot of those author illustrator guys were sort of big influences and heroes of mine at that time.
With Jim Henson, was it anything in particular, or just that he was just kind of doing a bunch of different projects? Like, was there something about his style or the work he was doing that really drew you towards him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just he just kind of exuded this idea of, you know, just dream and dream big. And, you know, I just have everything from the Muppets to Sesame Street was just so positive. And I just really think I connected with that message of like, just everything's possible, and doing it as a community. And then as I got to read more and more about his biography, just about the way he celebrated community and supporting others and really celebrating everyone that was part of projects and other creatives in the industry. And I think I just really admired that about him. And that's kind of always stuck with me through the years, I guess.
Yeah, that's real cool. When you were in middle school and high school, was there an artistic community that you kind of got plugged into, or did you ever veer away from thinking I'm going to do art the rest of my life? Was there ever any other option for you?
I mean, in high school, I definitely dreamt of being an NBA basketball player.
Okay.
I think in the end, I made the right choice to go with art school instead of pursue a college scholarship. So.
Yeah. Did you play basketball?
Yeah, I played all through, I mean, since middle school. I mean, in small town Buena Vista, it was like you could play basketball or, explore the wilderness. And I definitely did a little bit of both. But yeah. Basketball was a big part of high school for me, and it kept me out of trouble. But by about my junior year, I thought I better start really focusing in on where I want to go with art. And luckily I got a scholarship for art, and that kind of confirmed that that's probably the best route to go.
That's cool. So where'd you go to college for art?
It's a smaller school up in Denver. It's called Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. Since I've graduated, they've grown to be quite a big school now. But they're located in Golden.
Okay, cool. What was that art school experience like?
At the time, I mean, like I said, it was really small, so that really helped to get a lot of time with professors, and just grow like a community of artist friends. I think for me, it was really good to be able to. It was right before digital design really started to take hold, digital illustration, I mean. So it was really good to be able to focus on traditional media and really learn just the way to illustrate in that sort of realm. And then wasn't until like 6 months before I was going to graduate, I had to take this computer course in Photoshop, and I had no clue what I was doing. But right away I was like completely connected with how quickly you could, manipulate colors, and the undo button was very helpful.
Yeah. Control Z, it's just ready to go.
Control Z. And just also, it just kind of opened up a whole new door of possibilities, and especially with the industry. For me, it helped streamline a lot of the processes, but it was really good to have that foundation of traditional media before diving into the digital.
How has traditional helped you now, looking back at it? Like, do you work traditional at all in your illustrations now, or is it more of just kind of like the fundamentals that you have in there?
Yeah, I pretty much just do digital illustration, and that's been pretty much the last 10 years. Okay. I definitely still do some traditional media just when I'm working with my kids, just for fun. But as far as actual client work or personal projects, I really don't, which I know is a bit of a shame, but it's just, I just felt way more comfortable there. And I still feel like I have so much to learn just with digital media and how to, there's just so many good new brushes that come out and different ways to use the programs that I still feel like I have a lot to learn there.
Gotcha. So when you graduated, did you go straight into working for a company? Were you doing freelance, or was it a little bit of both?
Luckily I was able to get an internship with Young Life, and I had actually been doing sort of Young Life ministry as a youth minister through college as my job. And it was kind of at that time I was still, again, it was like with the basketball and art, I was kind of deciding, do I go into youth ministry or do I pursue art as a career? I definitely had a passion for both. Uh-huh. And they were both a big part of my story growing up. And then luckily, the headquarters here in Colorado Springs is where Young Life is headquartered. They had an opening for an internship, and I did that internship there. And then they just asked me to stay on as a designer. And then, it was like a couple months in, I had really, like I said, hadn't done much digital or design work because my major was in illustration. But they kind of took a chance on me. And then the lead designer kind of got into some hot water, and they said, do you want to take on the role of lead designer? And I really had no idea what I was doing, but I said, sure. And then 10 years later, I was there. And it was during that time, really, I learned a ton about the industry, and they let me, use some illustration work in the magazines and some of the campaigns that we worked on, and books and magazines and stuff like that. But it was mostly all design work. And over that time, I started to do a little bit more freelance on the side and focus on illustration with lots of magazines, doing a lot of actual like band albums,
Okay, cool.
posters, kind of stuff. Because that's kind of where I thought I was going to start going in that direction, was just because I played music and I was in a band, and it's just sort of felt like that was where things were heading. And it wasn't, gosh, probably till, I'd been there for probably about 5 or 6 years. I started to get into more like editorial stuff with some like children's magazines, and I really enjoyed that. It felt like it was sort of coming full circle back to that early years of loving, Highlights magazine, Scholastic books, and just stuff like that. That felt like maybe that was on the horizon again. So started to focus more on children's literature on the side, and then actually launched my own company in 2010,
Okay.
and left Young Life at that point.
What was that like? Because it sounds like you're working for an organization that you cared about. You cared about what they were doing. You'd been there for 10 years, and then you're going out on your own. Like, were you nervous? Did you have family at the time? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the reason for it. My wife, we just had our first kid, Owen, and she wanted to be able to stay at home, and I mean, so did I want her to stay home with them, and so I had started to take on some freelance at that point, just to help cover, cost of living, and so that's when I started really doing night shift work, and doing illustration at night. And then, 7 years later, it had gotten to the point where I was doing, 40-hour workday at Young Life, and, about 30 to 40 hours at night, just around the clock. And it just felt like it was time to just make that jump. So, made that jump pretty comfortably. I mean, it was obviously always a little bit of a risk when you do that, but I established a pretty consistent clientele at that point. I felt comfortable doing that. And even at that time, I wasn't doing any children's books. I was still just doing a lot of children's magazines and album covers and logo work for different friends and ministries. And so it really wasn't until about 2000, I think, like 13, that I got my first like children's book job with a friend of mine. And so it was kind of a self-authored book that she was a musician, and her and her husband had written it. It was called The Golden Feather. And that was kind of one of the first sort of forays into children's literature and illustration that I'd really been able to do for a job. And then from there, it just kind of, once that book got out, and then some other smaller publishers saw it. And really, I mean, to get into the children's book, it really wasn't until I went to the first Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators conference out in New York. And that was in 2015 that it kind of really opened up. And I'd done a few books at that time with Random House, doing sort of with the Smithsonian. It was this like fact book series. It was really
cool. Yeah.
Sort of the first officially like large publisher I'd worked with. And so it's been really fun to stay connected with them. And I felt like they kind of opened the door to that world to really just go full force into it at that point. And so at that point, I just kind of said no to every other design work and logos and all that stuff. I don't really do any like album covers or anything like that anymore. It's just 100% children's books.
What's made you kind of turn the corner to kids' books, to children's books?
I think just like, is that sort of like that first love? Just feeling like it's just that place where you feel the most comfortable, the most confident, and just always been, it's sort of that thing that's always been sort of in the background as a passion, whether it's storytelling and writing stories. And so I've always done that as a songwriter. That was a big part of it. And really transitioned from being a songwriter right into writing kids' books was pretty a natural transition. And then having kids, that just really kind of confirmed it, because then it was just, more and more books being brought into the house, more and more just kind of connecting with other artists and illustrators. And I think from there, it just really sort of solidified the fact that was where I felt most at home. And definitely I'm grateful, because it just feels like it was that, circle of inspiration from when I was young to now being able to, inspire the next sort of younger generation of creatives. And that's what I love doing, is just getting out and sharing the books and reading the books and, hearing these little kids, it's so hilarious when they stand up. And I love when you say, it's like a question answer time, and their questions are always really just facts. It's, I've written, I love that they say I've authored 2 books already, or like how much they love to draw. And so for me, that's the best part of the job, really.
Do you, how old are your kids?
8, 10, and 13.
Okay. So maybe when they were a little bit younger, were there some favorite books that you guys had around your house?
Yeah, I mean, all the work of, I think Michael Slack it was definitely one of my favorites early on, when I started getting into the industry. And so we've got a huge Slack stack, we call it. So I think, Michael Slack's probably one of the big influences. Of course, I had collected a ton of books when I was a kid, and I still had a lot of those. So, J.P. Miller is probably one of my biggest influences in the illustration world, from when I was a younger kid. But I mean, I think just pretty much everybody I follow on Twitter is people who have been a huge impact, whether it was at the very beginning to, just yesterday, getting to connect with other artists.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I had Michael Slack on, I guess it was a couple months ago, and it's cool looking at your style, and you can definitely see some kind of similarities, but it's still unique. And I'm sure you get this question a ton, but how did you kind of develop your style and your look? Because even when I look through all your different projects, you can definitely tell, like, oh, that, like, Luke did that. That's one of his projects. Was that something that you tested out different styles, or you just kind of fit into one and kind of go with that groove?
Yeah, I think it was actually interesting when I first started my own company. I had a little project where I was doing this web zine for this sort of, like, every week I had to come up with an illustration, and I did that for like 3 years, or 2.5 years. And so over that time, I mean, every week they wanted me to kind of try something different. I mean, some of them were sort of repeat styles, but I was really just, I mean, it's like 200 different illustrations of just different styles. And I think over that time is when I really started to lean towards a certain look. They more naturally came just to be sort of whimsical, a little clever, vibrant. I think that's kind of the elements that stuck with me. And so as I got into children's books, I think the influences of some of the, like, early stuff I'd grown up with, like the little golden books, and then just different illustrators, like, like I said, like Michael Slack, or just tons of different artists. But I think those are the ones that probably helped me kind of hone my style. And then, I mean, it's always still adapting here and there. One of the things I do a lot more now is, like, gallery work.
Okay.
And that really helps me sort of just explore styles and techniques and push it. I think still staying consistent, but trying out just a little bit of, maybe it's a couple new brushes or just a different approach to character design. So I think it's always evolving slowly. I don't ever want to just completely abandon a look, but as I look back over the last couple of years, I could even see a pretty big change from, kind of how I approach different elements, from the way that, just drawing the way you draw eyes, or, just little details. So I think it's always changing.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you're working on your own projects, so I guess the ones that you author and illustrate, is there usually a story idea that you kind of start out with, or is there a character, or kind of how do you get moving into a story?
Yeah, I think for me, often it starts with just a story I've made up with my kids. I think that's where most of my stories that I'm working on pitching this year were just a collection of stories that sort of grew out of a random incident with my kids, or a story that they asked me to start telling at night, and then it's kind of grown from there. So I always kind of have, like, a notebook full of ideas, I think, like most author illustrators, but I think just certain ones have, over time, just kind of stuck with me, that as, like, this might have potential. So that's really where I'm trying to focus this year, is trying to do more author illustrated work, and get to sharing those stories. I recently did the series with Scholastic, Moby Shinobi, and that was the first sort of author illustrator endeavor that I was able to dive into, and that started about 2 years ago. But I think that was a really good way to just learn the ins and outs of, just writing with a team. And thankfully I have an awesome team that works on it with me. And um, so really that's kind of where the stories have started for me. I feel like I'm still pretty new in the whole author illustrator realm, but that's sort of the exciting new adventure I hope unfold in the next couple of years.
So where did the idea for Moby come from?
It was actually interesting. It was out at the conference, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, back in 2015. They have it's one of the best opportunities out there that you get to put your portfolio out, and like 200 different art directors and editors and people in the industry just come through and look at your portfolio, and you can leave some postcards out. And it was that first year I went, I had a little postcard of this like little spy looking guy that was kind of hanging down. And I came back home after the conference, didn't know if anything would come of it. And about 2 months later, Scholastic called me, and they said, "Would you be interested in doing a ninja book? We saw, we picked up your postcard," and it was Katie Corella at Scholastic that had picked it up and called me and said, "We would love to, have you develop a ninja series," and so kind of started down that road. And they said, "Would you be up for writing it as well?" And of course, I was doubly delighted at that point. Not only be able to work with Scholastic, which has been like a lifelong dream, but then to be able to also write it, and of course working with ninjas. So so I pitched him like 3 different ways we could go with a ninja story. One was like a space ninja. One was sort of this like mythical creature ninja guy that he would chase these mythical creatures. And then the one that finally stuck was the one where Moby goes and sort of messes up job sites until he gets it right. So I'm really glad they went with that route, because that was the one I was most excited about too. But from there, then we just kind of come up with locations, and we've kind of got like this long list of where he could go.
That's cool.
Which is kind of fun to think of the longevity it might have. So right now I just finished writing book 3, and I'll start illustrating it in April.
Gotcha. So going into kind of your illustration process and going kind of nuts and bolts, how do you kind of go through a workflow? Are you starting with small thumbnails and then fleshing it all the way out to the final illustrations, or kind of what's it look like for you?
Yeah, I usually start in my notebook, usually just sketching out some quick little rough thumbnails, especially for storyboarding, like the story and then I go right from, I just usually snap some photos of those and then take it in digitally to actually sort of clean them up to be able to send to clients, or use for my own book dummies. So yeah, it usually goes from a really loose thumbnail to actual digital sort of cleaning up to sketch, but still pretty loose. And then once the clients are happy with where that's at, then I really just go straight to Photoshop. And start laying in shapes, and then, just sort of the details and the brushwork. But it's all pretty, kind of like I was saying, going back to that traditional style of painting, just laying down some color shapes and start adding, details on top. And thank God for the Command Z.
Very, very, very true. You mentioned brushes. Do you have one that's like your go-to that you keep coming back to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kyle Webster, I think everybody uses him. But Brad Woodard also has an awesome set of brushes I've been using a lot of from Brave the Woods. And he's a longtime friend of mine that just continues. He probably another one of those ones that's influenced me a lot over the years. But yeah, his brushes, he's continued to come out with some really great new ones I've been using. But yeah, I usually just keep a set of about 25 different brushes that are kind of the go-to ones. And then as different projects come up, or Kyle or other artists release brushes, I kind of try to explore those until I feel like they're ready to come into the corral of favorites.
Yeah, so that's cool. So I'm looking on your site. I think one of the first things I saw of yours was your Pixar 80s posters, which were incredible. How did that come about? And maybe for folks that may not know what that is, give kind of a little bit of a background.
Yeah, that was actually started with it's a site that's still up. It's called Pixar Times.
Okay.
And they did this like series called Pixart. And every month they would invite a new artist just to come up with a theme, like a favorite, Pixar movie. And usually it was just illustrate your favorite character. But I tend to go maybe a little bit too big sometimes. And so I was like, well, what if I did an entire like series of like 3 posters kind of matched up with my favorite 80s films? And they were happy to oblige. They're like, well, we'll host it first and you can do the rest of them yourself. So it really just took off as just a fun sort of tribute to my favorite 80s films and my favorite Pixar movies. But I really hope to continue it. I just got so busy with all these other projects, it was hard to keep up. But I still got all the concepts for the rest of the, I guess, 15 movies now. So I've got quite a few more to go, but they've all got their sketches ready. So
that's so good. Do you have a favorite so far that you've done?
I think the WALL-E one. WALL-E is my favorite Pixar movie.
Yeah.
E.T. was my favorite growing up. So that was like such a perfect mashup that those work just the way that they do. So
yeah, that one's amazing. And for guys that are listening, we'll have links to all this in the show notes. But yeah, that one's a blast. Since you're a big fan of the 80s, do you do any Stranger Things fan art? Are you a fan of the show or?
Definitely a fan of the show. I haven't done any fan art. I started some. I just, like I said, it's so busy sometimes.
Yeah.
It hasn't gotten to, but I started one called Stranger Things. And it was just because what I love about Stranger Things the most is all the things that they have, like the yellow telephones or just the little elements that make it has that 80s vibe. So I think there's plenty of like Stranger Things people tributes out there. I just wanted to do a tribute to the things of Stranger Things. So
I love that. Get some Eggos, and yeah, that's perfect. That's real cool. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up, a couple questions we love to ask folks towards the end. You've actually probably mentioned some of them, but who are some of your favorite books when you were growing up? You mentioned some that your kids have now, but ones that really influenced you when you were a kid.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that I loved growing up was Shel Silverstein's books, just because I loved his writing and I just loved his weird drawings. So I think those are some of the first ones and the ones I've just still held on dearly to, just because I think they're so quirky. They're a bit dark, but they're still funny and they're also hopeful, which is kind of what I try to bring to my work. And then, like I said, J.P. Miller, I still collect. I'm still just always trying to collect more and more of his little books, and it's fun to find all the different projects he was part of back in the day. And then I think another one that probably influenced me a lot was Jolly Roger Bradfield, his book series. They're ones I just continue to collect those ones as well. So I tend to collect a lot more like older books that it's kind of that thing where you loved them growing up. You weren't quite sure, at the time why they were so great. And then you go back later and you realize they were all the same person, or this is, why you connect with them.
Yeah.
Because they were all by the same person. It's kind of like that with Mary Blair. Like, you loved her work growing up. I don't think any of us appreciate it like we do now. So going back, you realize just the depth of her work. So for me, it's a lot of that. You grow up and you're like, oh, I love that book. And then you start to realize all the connections of all these books that you loved. And so yeah, I feel like it's always growing, the influences of you. Yeah.
That's cool. The other question is, do you have a dream project to work on, whether it's a book or maybe it's someone like you would collaborate with, but is there something out there for you that's kind of like a pie in the sky project for you?
I'm actually started kind of putting together an idea for a children's book tribute to Jim Henson, and I'd love to work with the Henson Company on it. I've connected with them a little bit just through some gallery work, so a little bit of a foot in the door there, but if it goes anywhere, that would be a dream come true, just to pay tribute to Jim, just because he was such a huge influence to me growing up. And I mean, still everything that comes out of the Henson Company is a big part of sort of my creative inspiration.
That's cool. Well, sweet. And so what's the best place for folks to find you and the books you have out now and all the things you have coming for the future?
Yeah, if you just go to lukeflowerscreative.com is where you'll find the work. If you just search on Amazon, I have like an author page there as well. And then just LAF Creative on Twitter. That's probably where I spend most of my time as far as in the social stream. But yeah, those are probably the top 3 ways to find the work.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know you're a busy man. You got lots of irons in the fire. Is that the right term? And I just appreciate it. And your work's amazing. I can't wait to see what comes down the pipe for you. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. I've enjoyed just listening to all the other artists you've had through here. So I'm honored to be part of the crew.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.